Welcome to Mindset Matters Book Club YouTube channel. Please subscribe and like to hear new book summaries.
And today we're doing a true deep dive into one single really powerful book.
That's right, we're looking at Charles Duhigg's The Power of Habit, why we do what we do in life and business.
And this book, it's basically a scientific manual for understanding our own automatic behaviors.
Our mission today is to cut through all the noise and get right to the core mechanics of why we do things.
Exactly.
We're going to look at the neurology, the psychology of habits, how they're formed, and I think most importantly, how we can use that science to break the bad ones.
And build new ones.
And build new ones that, make our lives healthier, more efficient, more successful.
Well, and this is so crucial because the central argument Duhigg makes is it's just incredibly empowering.
Right.
Habits aren't set in stone. They're not some kind of fate or, a personal weakness. They're basically software programs our brain runs.
And if you can understand the mechanism, you can reprogram it.
Once you get that three-step loop, you really do gain the power to change things. It's the difference between feeling overwhelmed by your life and, taking control.
Okay, so for you, the listener, trying to get a handle on this, let's just quickly lay out the roadmap for the book because Duhigg breaks it all down into three big areas.
He does, and it's a really smart structure. First, we start at the micro level with individual habits.
Okay.
This part is all about the basic neurology. The basal ganglia, the psychology of craving, and that foundational idea, the habit loop itself.
So this explains the nuts and bolts of why, for instance, you compulsively check your phone the second you hear a notification.
Exactly. Then he scales up to organizational habits.
This is where we see it all applied to, big groups, companies, institutions.
Right. We'll talk about keystone habits. These are single routines that have this huge ripple effect. And how things like willpower can be taught systematically, like what they did at Starbucks.
And then the last part goes even wider to the habits of societies.
Yeah, which is fascinating. We'll look at how these automatic routines can drive massive social movements, like the Civil Rights Campaign in the U.S.
And then we get into some really tricky ethical questions. What happens when automatic behavior takes over from conscious choice? What does that mean for legal responsibility?
It's huge scope, right? We're going from, a single neuron firing in a rat's brain all the way up to the moral accountability of a gambler.
But the beautiful thing, and what Duhigg shows so well, is that the underlying mechanism, that loop, it's always the same. Okay, so to really get the foundation of habit, we have to start with a story that, it really changed neuroscience. We have to talk about Eugene Pauly, or EP.
Right.
Because his experience proved that the part of your brain that remembers things and the part that forms habits are totally separate.
And EP is, arguably just as important to memory research as the famous patient HM, Henry Molaison.
So what happened to EP?
He had a severe viral infection, viral encephalitis. And it basically just destroyed the tissue deep in the center of his brain, right near the basal ganglia.
And the result was this catastrophic amnesia. To give you an idea of the extent of it, he couldn't remember what day of the week it was.
Wow.
He couldn't remember his doctor's names, even if they just left the room and came back 5 minutes later. He didn't even remember being sick. The world was just constantly new.
And here's the important part, the paradox. The virus hit the center of his brain, but it largely spared other parts, like the hippocampus.
Which is usually associated with memory.
Exactly. So EP was constantly resetting. He'd, get up, cook himself bacon and eggs, go back to bed, and then 40 minutes later get up and do the exact same thing all over again.
With no memory of the first breakfast.
None at all. And yet, and this is the key, despite this total paralysis of his conscious memory, he could still function in some ways.
Right, like when they moved to a new house. He couldn't draw you a map of the layout. He couldn't even point to the door that led to the kitchen.
His wife, Beverly, was warned that if he ever went outside, he'd be lost instantly.
But he wasn't.
He wasn't. He would snip out the door, walk around the block, and he would always consistently find his way back home.
Sometimes with things he found, right? Like pine cones or even a puppy once.
With no memory of where he got them, and when he was hungry, you wouldn't have to think about it. He'd just stand up, walk straight to the kitchen, open the right cabinet, and get a jar of nuts.
The scientific revelation here is just huge.
It's massive.
EP's ability to form these new physical habits, even without any memory of learning them, proved that habits live in the basal ganglia. It's a totally separate system from conscious memory.
And that distinction is everything. The basal ganglia is this ancient olive-sized bit of tissue right near your brainstem. It stores and runs these automatic routines.
And if you compare that to HM, who had his hippocampus removed and couldn't form new memories.
Right, even HM could learn new physical skills. He could learn to draw a shape by looking in a mirror, and he'd get better each day, even though he had no memory of ever doing it before.
So HM showed that skills were possible without conscious memory. But EP showed that even a total memory wipe doesn't kill the engine of habit.
It exists for a very good reason, evolutionarily speaking. Habits stop us from being, mentally paralyzed.
Imagine having to consciously decide every single tiny thing you do.
How to pull a zipper, which foot to put first when you're walking, how to turn a doorknob. Your conscious brain, your prefrontal cortex would just be completely overwhelmed.
So the basal ganglia saves energy. It takes these frequent actions and compresses them into, what does Duhigg call it? Chunking.
Chunking. And this was shown so clearly in those classic rat maze experiments at MIT.
Okay, tell us about those.
So they were really meticulous. They had these rats with tiny wires implanted in their brains to monitor activity in the basal ganglia.
And the setup was a simple T-shaped maze.
Yeah.
A clicking sound was the starting cue, and a piece of chocolate at the end was the reward.
And at first, when the rats were new to the maze, their brains were just lighting up like a Christmas tree.
An explosion of activity. Every sniff, every scratch, every turn. The brain was analyzing everything, trying to figure it out.
That's a conscious decision-making brain just burning through energy.
Exactly. But then, after the rats had run that same route hundreds of times, something dramatic happened. The routine became automatic.
The brain activity just plummeted.
It decreased significantly between the start and the finish. All the parts of the brain related to memory and conscious thought just went quiet.
That drop in energy is the signature of chunking in action.
The basal ganglia had converted that whole sequence run, turn, stop into one single automatic chunk. It's like a macro command.
So the rest of your brain is free to think about other things, like what you forgot at the grocery store while you're driving home.
And here's the most amazing part. The activity didn't go completely flat. It still spiked at two very specific moments, at the beginning and at the end.
Right. The first spike happens the second the rat hears the click, the cue.
Why then?
Because the brain has to wake up for a split second and decide, okay, which one of my hundreds of stored habits should I run right now?
It's scanning the database.
Pretty much. And the second spike happens when the rat finds the chocolate, the reward.
And that spike says, okay, this loop worked. Save it. Do it again next time you hear that cue.
These two spikes are the bookends of the habit. They tell the brain when to hand over control to a habit and which one to use.
And this brings us to the core concept of the entire book, the three-step habit loop.
You have the cue, which is the trigger, then the routine, the behavior itself, and finally, the reward.
But the really important part is what happens over time.
Over time, the cue and reward get so intertwined that they create this powerful subconscious sense of anticipation and craving. And that craving is what really drives the whole thing.
And we have to remember, the book is very clear on this. Habits never really go away.
No, they don't get erased. They're encoded in your basal ganglia, just waiting for the right cue to pop back up. That's why changing a habit is about replacement, not deletion.
Okay, so we've got the neurology down. Now let's look at how habits are actually, deliberately created. And the best place to start is this amazing historical case study of Claude Hopkins and Pepsodent toothpaste.
Oh, this story is fantastic. It shows just how hard it is to create a new habit from scratch. In the early 1900s, almost nobody brushed their teeth.
It was financial suicide to try and sell toothpaste.
Totally. National dental hygiene was so bad that during World War I, it was actually considered a national security risk because so many Army recruits had rotting teeth.
So this famous ad man, Claude Hopkins, comes along, and he has these two core rules for creating a new habit.
Find a simple, obvious cue and clearly define the reward.
So how did he apply that to brushing teeth, something nobody was doing?
Well, for the cue, he focused on tooth film, that, fuzzy coating you can feel on your teeth.
He didn't invent that idea, but he made it famous.
He made it the entire focus. The ad said, run your tongue across your teeth, feel that film. That's what makes your teeth look dull. It was simple, obvious, and everyone has it.
And the reward wasn't just, you'll have healthier teeth, which is too abstract.
Right. It was beautiful, satin smooth teeth. It tapped into vanity, an immediate desirable feeling.
But the real genius was almost an accident, wasn't it?
It was. It was an ingredient in Pepsodent. citric acid and mint oil. They were basically there for flavor, but they were also mild irritants.
They treated that cool tingling sensation.
Exactly. That tingle became the internal cue and the reward all in one. It was the brain's signal that the product was working. People started to crave the tingle itself because it meant they were getting the reward of a clean mouth.
That sensory feedback is what drove the whole thing.
It's what created the national habit. And you can see the flip side of this, getting the cue wrong in the initial launch of Febreze.
All of the Febreze stories is a classic.
Yeah.
So P&G creates this miracle product that actually eliminates bad smells. It doesn't just cover them up.
A huge technological breakthrough. So they thought the marketing was obvious, the cue is bad smells, the routine is spray Febreze, the reward is no more smell.
But it was a complete flop. Sales tanked. Why?
Because the people who needed it the most, like the woman in the book with 9 cats, were completely desensitized to the smell. They were noseblind.
So the cue wasn't noticeable enough to trigger the habit loop.
Exactly. A bad smell just isn't a dependable, regular trigger for most people.
So how did they fix it? What was the breakthrough?
It came from just watching people. They found this one woman who loved Febreze, and she didn't use it to get rid of bad smells. She used it as the final touch after she finished cleaning a room.
Ah. She craved that burst of scent as a signal that her work was done.
P&G realized they had it all wrong. People don't crave the absence of something. They crave a sensory reward for their labor.
So they flipped the whole habit loop.
Completely. The cue was changed from bad smell to finishing a cleaning routine, making the bed, vacuuming.
And they added more perfume to the formula.
A lot more perfume. So Febreze became an air freshener first, an odor eliminator second. And the reward became that pleasant smell and the feeling of accomplishment. The room is clean.
And sales took off.
Doubled in 2 months. It became a billion-dollar product. All because they found the right cue and attached it to a craving for a sensory reward, just like the Pepsodent tingle.
And this all comes back to the neurology, right? The experiments with Julio the monkey.
Absolutely. So Julio was trained on a simple loop. See shapes on a screen, pull a lever, get a squirt of juice, cue, routine, reward.
And at first, the pleasure center in his brain lit up after you got the juice. I got a reward.
Right. But once the habit was learned, that neurological spike of pleasure shifted. It started firing the moment he saw the shapes, the cue.
He was anticipating the reward.
The cue itself started to trigger a neurological anticipation. That, right there, is the definition of a craving. It's the basal ganglia firing an expectation of the reward.
This is why Cinnabon is so dangerous for my wallet.
They are masters of the environmental cue.
They put their stores away from the food courts on purpose.
So that powerful smell, the cue can waft down the hall all by itself. By the time you actually see the store, your brain has already been hit with that craving so many times that the book calls it a roaring monster.
The decision is almost made for you before you even get there.
And we do it to ourselves constantly with our phones. The chime or the vibration is the cue. That triggers a craving for distraction. The routine is to check the message. The reward is that tiny little hit of connection.
But the good news here is that we're not just slaves to these cravings.
Right. There's a way to change things. You have to use what Duhigg calls the golden rule of habit change.
And the best example of this in action is probably Alcoholics Anonymous.
It's a perfect model because AA works by attacking the habits around drinking, not just the, deep psychological issues.
So what is the golden rule?
It's surprisingly simple. To change a habit, you keep the same cue and the same reward, but you insert a new routine.
You feed the underlying craving, but with a different behavior.
Exactly. So with AA, the cue might be stress or loneliness. The reward the person craves is relief, escape, companionship.
You can't just get rid of stress.
No. So AA substitutes the routine of drinking with the routine of going to a meeting or calling a sponsor.
And that new routine provides the same essential reward, the relief, the connection. It satisfies the craving that was driving the whole loop.
That's the core of it. The belief in a higher power, that's what helps people get through the really tough moments when the old habit is screaming to come back.
We also see this golden rule in, of all places, the NFL, with Coach Tony Dungy.
Dungy's whole philosophy was that you don't win championships with crazy, once-in-a-lifetime plays. You win by doing the ordinary things automatically, faster than the other team can react.
He knew he couldn't just erase decades of old habits from his players.
So he didn't try. He used the golden rule. He kept the cues the same, a certain defensive formation, a specific play call, but he drilled his players to respond with his new disciplined routines.
So in the heat of the moment, they wouldn't have to think. They'd just react with the new habit.
Exactly. He replaced the old routine instead of trying to fight it.
Which brings us to the practical 4-step framework that you can use to change your own habits.
This comes right out of techniques like habit reversal training. So step 1 is easy. Identify the routine.
That's the thing you want to change. Going to the vending machine every afternoon.
Right. Step 2 is where the real work is. Experiment with rewards. You have to figure out what craving you're actually satisfying.
It's probably not just hunger for a cookie.
It could be boredom. It could be a need for distraction. It could be socializing with coworkers. So you have to test it. One day, instead of the cookie, get a cup of coffee. Another day, take a 5-minute walk.
And see which one actually scratches the itch.
Exactly. Then step 3, isolate the cue. You have to pinpoint the trigger. Cues almost always fall into one of 5 categories: location, time, emotional state, other people, or the immediately preceding action.
So you start to notice, oh, the urge always hits at 3:30 when I'm feeling bored and the office gets quiet.
Now you've got your cue, which leads to the final step. 4, have a plan.
This is where you pre-decide your new routine.
You write it down. When it is 3:30 and I feel bored, cue, I will get up and walk over to my friend's desk and chat for 3 minutes, new routine, to get a burst of distraction, reward.
You're inserting that new routine into the old loop.
You are. And the case of Mandy, the nail biter, shows this perfectly. She had to figure out her cue wasn't just stress. It was a specific physical sensation, a tingling in her fingertips.
So her new routine had to provide a similar physical stimulation.
Right. Instead of biting, she was trained to put her hands in her pockets or grip a pencil tightly, a competing response that gave her the same physical release she was craving, but in a non-destructive way.
Okay, so let's scale up from the individual to the organizational level. This is where we get to one of the most powerful ideas in the whole book. The keystone habit.
And the classic story here is the turnaround of Alcoa, the huge aluminum company, by their new CEO, Paul O'Neill.
Right, so O'Neill takes over in 1987. Alcoa is this struggling, inefficient, and frankly dangerous company.
Lots of worker injuries.
So he has his first big meeting with Wall Street investors, and they're all expecting to hear about, profit margins and cost cutting.
Usual CEO talk.
Instead, O'Neill gets up there and says his number one priority, his only focus, is going to be worker safety. He's aiming for 0 injuries.
And the investors were just completely baffled. The book says one of them calls his clients immediately after and said, the board put a crazy hippie in charge and he's going to kill the company.
So why safety? Why did he pick that one thing?
Because O'Neill understood that some habits, keystone habits, can start a chain reaction. They change other unrelated habits all across an organization.
And safety was something everyone could agree on.
Exactly. The unions, the managers, everyone. It gave him the moral leverage he needed to force huge changes.
So he built a new organizational habit loop around safety.
A perfectly designed one. The cue. An employee gets injured. Simple. You can't miss it.
And the routine.
The president of that unit had to report the injury to O'Neill himself within 24 hours. And not just report it, but come with a detailed plan for how to make sure it never happened again.
Wow, 24 hours to the CEO. That's intense. And the reward.
The reward was your career. Only the managers who embraced this system, who got good at it, were the ones who got promoted. He created a craving for advancement that was tied directly to safety.
And the ripple effect was just massive.
It had to be. To get a report and a prevention plan to the CEO in 24 hours, you couldn't use the old, slow, bureaucratic channels.
The entire communication structure of the company had to change overnight.
Information had to flow instantly from the guy on the factory floor all the way to the top. They had to adopt new data systems to figure out why machines were failing.
So the focus on safety forced them to become more efficient and data-driven in every other area.
And more profitable. If you redesigned a system to stop splashing molten metal on workers, you also stopped wasting millions of dollars in molten metal. Better safety led to better quality and lower costs. O'Neill's one keystone habit completely transformed the company.
And this idea of keystone habits creating small wins applies in other areas too, right? Like with Michael Phelps.
Oh, absolutely. His coach, Bob Bowman, was a master of routine. He built this incredibly detailed, automatic pre-race ritual for Phelps.
We're talking granular stuff, right?
Yeah.
The exact time he woke up, the exact meal he ate.
The exact 45-minute warm-up sequence, the specific hip-hop playlist, every single step was a predictable, automatic chunk.
It created this sense of control and accumulating victory before he even got in the pool.
But the most important habit was mental. It was visualization. Every night, Phelps would run a mental video of the perfect race.
But not just the perfect race. Bowman also made him visualize potential disasters.
Right. Like, what do you do if your goggles fill up with water? And that's exactly what happened in the 200-meter butterfly final in Beijing.
A total catastrophe for a swimmer. He was basically blind.
But he didn't panic. His ingrained mental habit just took over. He didn't have to think. He just started counting his strokes, the exact number he had rehearsed for that scenario.
And he won the gold and set a new world record. Blind.
His habits turned a potential disaster into an automatic win.
And you mentioned social change, too. Small wins can build momentum for huge movements.
Yeah, Duhigg points out that an early victory for the gay rights movement was getting the Library of Congress to reclassify books about homosexuality. It seems small, but that win created belief and helped propel the larger movement forward.
So let's talk about another keystone habit, but one that feels more personal. Willpower. And how Starbucks tried to turn it into an organizational habit.
This is fascinating. Starbucks had this problem. They hire thousands of young, entry-level workers, and they need them to have this incredible self-discipline to provide a bit of sparkle with every latte, even when they're stressed or dealing with a rude customer.
And the book talks about how willpower isn't infinite. It's like a muscle that gets tired.
Exactly. There's that famous experiment with the radishes and the cookies.
Right, the people who had to use their self-control to resist eating fresh-baked cookies and eat radishes instead.
They gave up on a difficult puzzle much faster afterwards than the people who got to eat the cookies. Their self-control muscle was exhausted.
So Starbucks realized they couldn't just hire people with more willpower. They had to build a system.
They had to turn self-discipline into an organizational habit. They created pre-programmed routines for what they called inflection points.
Those moments of stress when your willpower is most likely to fail.
Like an angry customer yelling at you.
And this is where the LAD method comes from.
The LAD method. It's an automatic routine. Listen to the customer, acknowledge their complaint, take action, thank them, and explain why the problem happened.
So when an employee is getting yelled at and their willpower muscle is about to give out, they don't have to think. They just run the LAD script.
It gives them a pre-chosen behavior. And the amazing thing is, research shows that practicing self-control in one area, like following the script at work, actually strengthens your willpower muscle and helps you in other areas of your life.
So it's a keystone habit for personal development that Starbucks teaches for business reasons.
That's it, exactly.
Okay, we've seen how powerful, well-designed habits can be. But what happens when organizational habits just emerge on their own, out of conflict or fear?
That's when you get real disasters. The book makes this point that habits in organizations often act as truces between different groups, but sometimes those truces are toxic.
And the example of Rhode Island Hospital is just chilling.
It's a devastating story. It was this top-tier hospital, but behind the scenes, there's this huge tension between the surgeons, who were often really arrogant, and the nurses who felt completely powerless.
And so these unofficial toxic habits started to form.
Yeah, these little workarounds. Nurses would secretly double-check surgeons' prescriptions because they knew some of them made a lot of errors.
And they had that color coding system on the whiteboard, right? Blue for a nice doctor, red for a jerk.
To warn each other about which surgeons you could question and which ones you absolutely couldn't. The truce was basically the nurses would eat the abuse, and in exchange, the surgeons would let them quietly fix their mistakes.
But that is such an unbalanced, dangerous truce.
And it crumbled at the worst possible moment, leading to that wrong side brain surgery.
The elderly man comes in with a brain bleed. The surgeon is rushed. He's arrogant. And the nurse points out that the consent form doesn't say which side of the head to operate on.
But she's new, she's intimidated, and she knows the unwritten rule. The real habit of the hospital is the surgeon always wins.
So the surgeon just ignores her, scribbles right on the form himself, and goes ahead.
And the nurse just steps aside. The official safety routine, the checklist, the timeout, it meant nothing compared to the powerful, toxic habit of not challenging an arrogant surgeon.
And he drilled into the perfectly healthy side of the man's brain.
It's just a horrifying breakdown. The system was designed to protect the surgeon's ego, not the patient's life.
And we see a different kind of breakdown, but with similar results. In the London Underground fire at King's Cross, 31 people died.
And this wasn't about one person's arrogance. It was about rigid departmental habits that had solidified over decades. The whole organization was siloed.
The examples are just unbelievable. The ticket clerks saw a small fire start, but they didn't report it immediately because they'd been told their job was only selling tickets. Operations was not their problem.
And a critical safety report never got to the right person because it was mailed to a different department. Employees had no idea how to use the sprinkler system because a totally separate division was in charge of it.
Even the professional firefighters, when they arrived, wouldn't use the water pipes inside the station.
Because their orders were never to use equipment installed by another agency. They had their own hydrants on the street, so that's what they used, wasting precious time.
So each department's habits made perfect sense within their own little world.
But when a crisis hit that crossed all those invisible lines, the whole system just fell apart. No single person or department was truly in charge of overall passenger safety.
But the book does say that a crisis like this can be the very thing that forces change.
Absolutely. Good leaders use a crisis to smash old, broken habits.
Mm.
After the story of the wrong side surgery became a huge public scandal, Rhode Island Hospital had that jolt.
They had no choice but to change everything.
They shut down all elective surgeries for a full day, which costs a fortune for mandatory teamwork training. They installed cameras in the operating rooms. They made checklists non-negotiable.
They created a new culture, a new set of habits where safety was finally more important than ego.
Exactly. So now even the newest nurse could stop a surgery without fear because the new habit, the checklist, demanded it.
And we've seen this happen after other huge disasters, right?
The Challenger explosion forced NASA to completely overhaul its safety culture. The Tenerife airport crash, the deadliest in history, led to a worldwide change in how pilots and co-pilots communicate in the cockpit. Crisis forces the re-engineering of routine.
All right, so let's scale up one last time and look at how habits can fuel massive social change across thousands of people. The Montgomery bus boycott is the perfect example.
It is, because most people think it all started with Rosa Parks on that one day in 1955.
But she wasn't the first person arrested for refusing to give up her seat.
Not at all. A few other women had been arrested for the same thing earlier that year, but their arrests didn't spark a citywide movement. So the question is, why was Parks different?
And the answer is social habits. Specifically what the book calls strong ties.
Her friendships. Rosa Parks wasn't just some random person. She was deeply, deeply respected and connected within the community.
She was the secretary of the local NAACP. She was active in her church.
And crucially, she was a seamstress for some of the most influential white families in town. She was embedded in dozens of social networks.
So when she was arrested, the social habits of friendship kicked in immediately.
Her friends, people like E.D. Nixon, bailed her out. They started making calls, printing flyers. People who might have been apathetic before were moved to act because they knew her, they respected her, they fought for her.
So the strong ties got it started. But then to make it scale, they had to activate the weak ties.
Right, the connections to the broader community. This is where social pressure comes in. The news spread through the churches, the schools.
And then there was that genius move with the taxi drivers.
Convincing the black taxi drivers to charge only 10 cents a ride, the same as a bus fare, that basically made participating in the boycott compulsory. If you were black and you were seen riding the bus, you would really stand out.
The weak ties created this powerful community pressure to conform.
And the final piece was creating new self-propelling habits that gave people a new sense of identity.
So when the police started harassing the carpool system, it didn't break the movement.
It made it stronger. Martin Luther King Jr. was brilliant at reframing the struggle. It wasn't just about a bus seat anymore. It was about dignity, freedom from fear.
It became part of people's identity to be a part of the movement. The habits of protest and community support became self-directing.
And this three-part structure, start with strong ties, expand with weak ties, and then lock it in with identity-forming habits, was actually copied intentionally by Pastor Rick Warren when he built Saddleback Church.
Right. He saw why people were leaving traditional churches. The sermons were boring. The music was bad.
So he fixed all that practical stuff to draw in huge crowds. That's the weak ties, that sense of being part of a big community.
But the really smart move was what he did next.
He immediately pushed all those people into small, neighborhood-based groups for weekly meetings. That's where the strong ties, the real friendships were formed.
And he created curriculums to explicitly teach what he called habits of faith.
Daily prayer, tithing, small group attendance. He made spiritual growth a routine, something that became part of your identity and self-perpetuating, rather than just a decision you make once.
This all leads to the final really thorny question the book raises about ethics and responsibility.
Right. When does a powerful craving or an automatic habit become so strong that it overrides your free will?
And this is explored through two very different legal cases. First, the case of Brian Thomas.
The man who strangled his wife in his sleep, he was having a sleep terror, and he thought an intruder was attacking her.
His defense was that he was acting automatically. A sleep terror is like a primitive fight-or-flight habit loop that gets triggered while your conscious brain, your prefrontal cortex, is essentially offline.
He had no conscious control. It was a purely automatic, unthinking reaction, and the court ultimately found him not guilty.
They decided his capacity for decision-making was gone. He acted on habit.
Now, contrast that with the case of Angie Bachman, the pathological gambler.
Her habit was driven by a powerful craving to escape her emotional pain. The cue was pain, the routine was gambling, the reward was a feeling of numbness and excitement.
And neurologically, her brain was different. It would register a near miss at a slot machine with almost the same pleasure spike as an actual win, which just keeps the craving cycle going and going.
And the casino, Haraz, knew she had this problem.
They knew it, and they exploited it. They targeted her with offers for free luxury suites, free credit, all designed to trigger her craving and keep her playing.
So when she lost her entire inheritance and went bankrupt, they sued her for the money she owed them.
And her lawyer made a similar argument to the Brian Thomas case, that her craving was so overwhelming and the casino's manipulation was so deliberate that her free will was basically gone. She was acting on a compulsive habit.
But she lost. She was held responsible.
And that's the contradiction Duhigg leaves us with. Thomas, who killed someone, was found not guilty because he acted unconsciously. Bachman, who lost her own money, was held responsible because she was technically awake and choosing to pull the lever.
So the law still really struggles with where to draw the line between a bad choice and a neurological compulsion. So after all this, what does this entire deep dive mean for you? I think it boils down to one really powerful idea.
That every single habit you have, no matter how complex it seems, is malleable.
If you can understand that cue routine reward loop, and if you can figure out the craving that's driving it, you can change it.
We've seen it everywhere. In personal change, like stopping a snacking habit. In organizations like the Keystone Habit that transformed Alcoa.
Even in huge social movements like civil rights. The key is never to try and fight the cue or the craving. You have to redirect the routine.
And the big takeaway is just how delicate and yet how powerful habits are. They're encoded, they never really vanish, but a small, deliberate tweak to the routine can push the worst ones into the background.
It takes conscious effort. You have to design a new pattern that gives you the same old reward, just in a healthier way.
And that deliberate effort, that idea of choosing, brings us to the very end of the book, and to William James, the father of American psychology.
Who, as a young man, was just crippled by depression and self-doubt.
In a state of total crisis. And he decided to conduct an experiment on himself. For 1 year, he was going to choose to believe that he had free will.
Even though he had no proof.
He had no proof. He wrote in his diary, "My first act of free will shall be to believe in free will."
He knew that if he just practiced that belief, if he treated his own choices as intentional every single day, it would eventually become a habit, a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And it was that habit, the habit of believing in his own agency, that helped pull him out of his depression and allowed him to become one of the most important thinkers of his time.
It's a really provocative way to end, and it leaves a perfect question for you, the listener, to think about. Habits shape our lives more than we can imagine, but maybe the ultimate power comes down to belief. So the question is, what long-held assumption about your own capacity to change are you willing to test for the next year?